Welcome, dear traveler, to this long and winding journey through the ancient stories of love that dared to cross the boundaries between heaven and earth. As you settle into your chosen place of rest, whether beneath warm blankets or cool sheets, know that you have chosen to embark upon a voyage that will last through the turning of many hours, through the deepening of night into its most profound mysteries, and perhaps into the gentle approach of dawn itself. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Whether you rest in a bustling city where lights still flicker beyond your window, or in some quiet countryside where only the wind speaks to the trees, or perhaps somewhere between, in those liminal spaces where the modern world meets the ancient rhythms that still pulse beneath our everyday awareness. Wherever you are welcome here, in this sanctuary of story, this refuge of remembered dreams. Here on Boring Mythology, we walk slowly through tales that have been told since humans first looked up at the stars and wondered what manner of beings might dwell there, what passions might move them, what longings might draw them down from their celestial heights to walk among us, if only for a moment, if only for the span of a mortal life that to them must seem as brief as the blooming and fading of a single flower. Tonight, we shall explore that most ancient and forbidden of all themes. The love between gods and mortals, between the eternal and the ephemeral, between those who command the thunder and those who merely hear it rolling across the sky. These are stories of divine desire and human yearning, of boundaries crossed and prices paid, of transformations and trials, of passion that burns brighter than any earthly fire, yet must always reckon with the fundamental inequality between lover and beloved when one counts their years in heartbeats and the other in the turning of ages. Feel now how the air around you begins to shimmer, as if touched by something older than memory, something that existed before the first words were spoken, before the first stories were carved into stone or painted on cave walls. The ordinary world grows thin, like morning mist before the sun, and through its gossamer veil we begin to glimpse other realms, other possibilities, other ways of being that our ancestors knew were always there, just beyond the edge of everyday sight. We begin our journey in the marble halls of Olympus, where Zeus, king of gods, father of storms, wielder of lightning, sits upon his throne and gazes down through the clouds at the world below. Even now, in this moment before our story truly begins, we can feel the weight of his attention, heavy as thunderclouds, electric as the moment before lightning strikes. The very air of Olympus carries a different quality than earthly air. It is thicker somehow, more substantial, as if each breath contains within it the essence of power itself, of authority that needs no explanation, no justification, but simply is. The palace of the gods rises around us in impossible architecture, columns that seem to stretch beyond sight, halls that echo with footsteps that might have been taken yesterday or 1,000 years ago. For time moves differently here. Pools and eddies, and sometimes flows backward altogether. The marble beneath our feet is not cold, as earthly marble would be, but warm, almost alive, pulsing with a subtle rhythm like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Golden light suffuses everything, not the harsh gold of mortal treasure, but something softer, more forgiving, like honey poured through air, like amber catching the last light of a sun that never quite sets. And there, upon his throne, but we shall come to Zeus in time, in the proper time, when the threads of our story have been properly prepared. First, we must understand the nature of divine love itself, how it differs from mortal affection, how it burns with a fire that can create or destroy with equal ease, how it moves through the world like wind through grain, bending everything it touches, leaving traces that can last for generations. The gods love differently than mortals do. Their passion is not tempered by the knowledge of death's approach, by the ticking clock that makes human love so precious and so desperate. When a god loves, it is with the force of natural phenomena, like the ocean loving the shore, wearing it away grain by grain over millennia, reshaping coastlines, creating and destroying in the same eternal embrace. When a god desires, it is with the inexorable pull of gravity itself, drawing all things toward a center that cannot be resisted, cannot be reasoned with, can only be surrendered to or fled from. And even flight often proves futile. Yet mortals love with a different fire altogether. Theirs is the bright, brief flame of a candle in the darkness, all the more beautiful for its fragility, all the more precious for its transience. Mortal love carries within it the seeds of its own ending, and perhaps this is what draws the gods, who know no endings, who exist in an eternal present that stretches backward and forward without boundary. Perhaps they see in mortal love something they can never truly possess. The courage to love in the face of inevitable loss. The beauty of something that blooms knowing it must fade. As we prepare to enter more deeply into these stories, feel how your breathing has already begun to slow, how your body has begun to settle more completely into its place of rest. The ancient rhythms are already working their magic, drawing you into that state between waking and sleeping. where all the best stories live, where the impossible becomes not only possible but inevitable, where gods and mortals can meet as equals, if only in the democracy of dreams. We shall walk through gardens where Psyche wandered in her search for Eros, feeling our way through darkness, lit only by the lamp of determination, following paths that wind through trials designed to break the human spirit, yet somehow, only make it stronger. We shall stand with Selene as she gazes down upon sleeping Endymion, caught forever in that moment between one breath and the next, preserved in eternal youth by the very love that separates them. We shall hear the lamentations of Apollo, whose golden touch turns everything to music except the hearts of those he desires, who must watch again and again as his love becomes a curse to those who receive it. But these are Greek stories, and our journey tonight extends far beyond the boundaries of Hellas. We shall travel to the sacred rivers of India, where gods take human form not as disguise, but as genuine incarnation, where the divine literally becomes flesh and walks among humanity, subject to all the joys and sorrows that flesh is heir to. We shall witness Krishna dancing with the Gopis under the full moon, multiplying himself so that each believes she dances with him alone, creating a paradox of love that transcends the simple mathematics of one and many. We shall cross the mist-shrouded valleys to the islands of Japan, where the boundaries between human and kami blur like ink in water, where a deity might marry a mortal and live as human for years before their true nature reveals itself in some moment of crisis or transcendence. These are stories where love requires not just acceptance, but transformation, where mortals must shed their human limitations, not through death, but through a kind of metamorphosis that changes them from within, while leaving their essential humanity mysteriously intact. And we shall venture into the green hills of Celtic lands, where the other world lies not above or below, but beside our own, separated by boundaries thin as spider silk, permeable as morning mist. Here the fairy folk and mortal kind meet at crossing places, twilight moments, threshold spaces, the turning of seasons, and loves kindled in these meetings burn with a different light, neither wholly of one world nor the other, creating bonds that can survive the passage between realms, but extract prices that may not be paid for generations. Each of these traditions understands something essential about the nature of divine mortal love, something that speaks to the deepest parts of our own hearts. Even we who live in an age that has largely forgotten how to hear the voices of gods in wind and water, thunder and starlight. They remind us that love itself is a kind of divinity, that when we love truly, we touch something eternal, something that transcends the boundaries of our brief existence and connects us to currents that flow through all things, all times, all worlds. The clouds part slowly, like curtains drawn by invisible hands, and through them we see first the light, golden and warm as honey, then the marble that seems to glow from within, and finally the throne itself, massive beyond mortal comprehension, carved from a single block of stone that fell from heaven before heaven had a name. Upon this throne sits the king of Olympus, and even to look upon him indirectly, even to glimpse him through the veils of story and memory, is to understand power in its most primal form. Zeus does not simply rule the heavens. He is the heavens in all their moods and manifestations. When he frowns, clouds gather from the edges of the world. When he laughs, the sun breaks through storms. When he desires, and oh, how he desires, the very fabric of reality bends to accommodate his will, creating pathways between the divine realm and the mortal world. Passages that should not exist yet somehow do, because a god's desire makes its own laws. First, there was Europa, though in truth there was no first, for time in these stories curves back upon itself like a serpent swallowing its tail. But let us begin with Europa, princess of Phoenicia, whose beauty was of that particular kind that seems to glow from within, as if she carried some spark of divinity in her mortal frame without knowing it. She walked along the shores of her father's kingdom, her feet leaving delicate prints in sand that would be washed away by the next tide. Temporary, as all mortal things are temporary. The waves whispered secrets to the shore that day, secrets in a language older than human speech. And perhaps some part of Europa understood them, for she paused in her walking, turned toward the sea with an expression of expectancy, as if she knew something approached, though she could not have said what. The bulls of her father's herd grazed in the meadows that stretched down to the water's edge, peaceful in the afternoon light. Their presence so ordinary, so expected, that when one more appeared among them, white as seafoam, with horns that caught the light like polished silver, no one thought to question its presence. Yet this was no ordinary bull. This was Zeus himself, wrapped in animal form as a king might wrap himself in a cloak, the disguise perfect in every detail except for the eyes. Those eyes that held depths no animal eyes should hold. Intelligence and desire and something else. Something that made Europa's heart beat faster, though she could not have said why. The bull was beautiful, more beautiful than any animal had a right to be, its white hide seeming to shimmer with an inner light, its breath sweet as spring flowers, its movements carrying a grace that suggested power held in perfect control. Europa found herself drawn to the creature, her feet carrying her closer without conscious decision, her hand extending to touch that perfect hide before she had decided to reach out. The bull lowered its great head, allowed her touch, and beneath her fingers she felt warmth that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, different from a heartbeat, more like the pulse of the earth itself, the deep rhythm that moves through all living things, but is usually too slow, too vast for human senses to perceive. The other maidens called to her, their voices carrying notes of warning they themselves did not fully understand. For sometimes, mortals sense the presence of the divine even when their conscious minds refuse to acknowledge it. But Europa did not listen, could not listen, for the bull had knelt before her, lowering itself with impossible grace, inviting without words, offering without demand. Yet the invitation and offer carried within them an inevitability that was itself divine. She climbed upon its back, laughing at her own daring, her white robes spreading across the white hide, until it was difficult to tell where maiden ended and bull began. For a moment, just a moment, all was stillness. The kind of stillness that comes before lightning strikes, before avalanches begin, before any great change that cannot be undone. Then the bull rose, and with its rising, everything changed. The journey across the wine-dark sea happened both instantly and over the course of hours that felt like days, that felt like years. The bull's hooves barely touched the wave tops, yet each step was solid as if on firm ground. Dolphins rose from the depths to accompany them, their sleek bodies forming an honor guard for this strange procession, this impossible journey from one world to another. The sun tracked across the sky, yet also seemed to stand still. Time itself confused by the passage of a god through spaces where gods were not meant to go, not in this form, not with this purpose. When they reached Crete, when Europa's feet touched solid ground again, the transformation was already beginning. Not her transformation, though she too would be changed by this encounter, but his. The bull form fell away like water, like light dissolving into greater light. And there stood Zeus, in something closer to his true form, though even this was only what mortal eyes could bear to see. He stood before her as a man, but a man whose every line and angle suggested more, suggested heights and depths that mortal flesh could never contain. From their union came Minos, who would be king, and Rhadamanthus and Sarpedon, all bearing within them that mixture of mortal and divine that would mark them as different, as other, as carrying within their blood the memory of that impossible afternoon when a god crossed the sea for love of a mortal woman. But we run ahead of ourselves, for Zeus's loves were many, and each tells us something different about the nature of divine desire. Then there was Leda, queen of Sparta, whose story begins not with her, but with the swan. Have you ever watched swans on still water? the way they move with such serene grace, the way their long necks curve in shapes that suggest questions without answers. There is something already otherworldly about swans, something that makes them perfect vessels for divine disguise. When Zeus came to Leda, he came as a swan pursued by an eagle, though the eagle too was his creation, part of the elaborate theater of seduction that gods employ when they wish to approach mortals without destroying them with the full weight of their presence. Leda was bathing in the river Eurotas when the chase passed by her. Swan and eagle locked in what seemed a dance of death, but was actually a dance of desire. The swan sought shelter in her arms, its great wings beating against her breast, its heart racing with what seemed like terror, but was actually anticipation. She held the creature, this woman who had held her own children, who knew the feeling of fragile life trembling against her body. And in holding the swan, she held also the god, though she would not know this until later, until the eggs were laid, until Helen and Clytemnestra and Castor and Pollux emerged into the world, some mortal, some divine, all carrying within them the confusion of that afternoon by the river. The swan's feathers were soft as clouds, as soft as anything she had ever touched. Yet beneath that softness was something else, a warmth that was not quite animal, a weight that was more than physical. When the eagle had gone, when the danger had passed, the swan did not flee. Instead, it settled more closely against her, its long neck curving around her own. And in that moment, Leda felt something shift in the world, some boundary dissolve, some law temporarily suspended. What happened then happens still in every telling of the story, yet cannot quite be told, for it exists in that space between the human and divine where language fails, where all we have are metaphors that point to a truth without quite reaching it. The swan that was not a swan, the woman who was fully woman, yet for that moment something more, the union that was both violation and veneration, both ending and beginning, both exactly what it seemed and nothing like what it seemed at all. From this encounter came consequences that would echo through generations, through the entire narrative of Greek mythology. Helen, whose beauty would launch 1,000 ships and burn the topless towers of Ilium. Clytemnestra, who would murder her husband and be murdered in turn by her children, playing out a cycle of vengeance that speaks to something deep in the human experience of justice and its absence. Castor and Pollux, the twins who were not quite twins, one mortal, one divine, yet bound together by bonds stronger than blood. Their love for each other eventually convincing Zeus to place them among the stars where they shine still, reminding us that some loves transcend even the boundary between mortality and divinity. But Zeus's transformations were not always into animals. Sometimes he came as golden rain, as he did to Danae, locked in her bronze tower by a father who feared the prophecy that her son would kill him. The bronze walls that no man could breach were nothing to a god who could become liquid light, seeping through cracks that existed between one atom and another, pooling in her lap like captured sunshine. Danae, alone for so long that solitude had become her only companion, suddenly found herself bathed in warmth that was more than warmth, light that was more than light. The golden rain did not fall as earthly rain falls. Each drop seemed to hang in the air for a moment before descending, as if time itself slowed to accommodate this impossible precipitation. Where it touched her skin, she felt not wetness, but something else. Something that made every nerve ending sing with awareness. Every cell of her body wake to possibilities she had never imagined. The rain pooled around her, formed patterns on the floor of her prison that seemed almost like writing, like messages in a language she could almost but not quite understand. When Perseus was born from this union, he carried within him both the liquid quality of his conception and the solid determination of his mortal mother. He would become the hero who slayed Medusa, who rescued Andromeda, who eventually, yes, fulfilled the prophecy by accidentally killing his grandfather with a discus thrown at games. For prophecies have their own inexorable logic that even gods cannot fully override, only delay or redirect. Each of Zeus's mortal loves followed a pattern yet was unique, like waves that all obey the same physical laws. Yet no two are exactly alike. There was Semele, who made the fatal mistake of asking to see her divine lover in his true form, forgetting or not understanding that mortal flesh cannot withstand the full presence of divinity. When Zeus appeared to her as himself, she was consumed in an instant by the divine fire, though their unborn child, Dionysus, was saved, sewn into Zeus's own thigh to complete his gestation, making him twice born, once of woman and once of God. Semele's story carries within it a warning that echoes through all these tales, that there are prices for touching the divine, that mortality and divinity mix only at great cost, that love between the realms requires sacrifice, transformation, sometimes destruction. Yet mortals continue to reach toward gods, and gods continue to descend toward mortals, as if both are seeking something in the other that they cannot find in their own kind. There was Alcmene, mother of Heracles, to whom Zeus came disguised as her own husband, extending one night into three so that he could fully express his passion, creating in those extended hours a child who would be the greatest of all heroes, strong enough to hold up the sky, brave enough to harass Hades, yet human enough to suffer, to fail, to die, and through dying achieve the apotheosis that would finally reconcile his dual nature. And Io, transformed into a cow to hide her from Hera's jealousy, wandering the earth in bovine form, tormented by gadflies, crossing continents in her madness and pain, yet eventually finding peace and human form again in Egypt, where she would become Isis, mother of gods in a different pantheon, as if the touch of Zeus had given her something that transcended even cultural boundaries. Even the divisions between different systems of belief. We could speak of Callisto, transformed into a bear and placed among the stars as Ursa Major, forever circling the pole, never setting below the horizon, as if Zeus wished to keep her always visible, always remembered. Or Antiope, who bore the twins Amphion and Zethus, one a musician whose lyre could move stones, the other a hunter and warrior, as if their divine parentage had split into different aspects, different ways of being in the world. The air changes as we leave Olympus behind, becomes somehow both lighter and heavier, charged with a different kind of divine presence. We find ourselves in a garden that exists between waking and sleeping, between the mortal world and the realm of dreams. Roses bloom here that have no earthly colors, their petals shifting through shades that human eyes can barely perceive, colors that exist in the spaces between red and purple, between pink and gold. Their fragrance carries memories of every beautiful thing that has ever been loved and lost. Every moment of perfect happiness that could not last. Every dream that felt more real than waking life. Through this garden walks a figure whose beauty is so complete that it becomes almost invisible, like light so bright it blinds. This is Psyche, whose name means soul, and perhaps that is what she is. Not just a woman, but the soul of every woman, every person who has ever loved something they could not see, could not name, could only feel in the darkness, when all other senses fall away. Her footsteps make no sound on the pearl soft grass, yet each step sends ripples through reality, as if her very presence disturbs the ordinary order of things. She does not yet know that she is walking toward her destiny, toward a love that will test every boundary between mortal and divine, between trust and doubt, between what we can see and what we must take on faith. All she knows is that she has been brought to this place by forces beyond her understanding, delivered here like an offering to a monster that no one has seen, but everyone fears. The oracle has spoken. Psyche must be wed to a creature that even the gods fear. a being of such terrible power that none can stand against it. What the oracle knew but did not say was that this monster was Eros himself, love personified, and indeed, what force is more terrible, more impossible to resist than love when it comes in its full power? The gods themselves fear Eros, for his arrows can pierce even divine hearts, can make Zeus himself forget his throne, can make Athena set aside her wisdom, can make Artemis forget her vows of chastity. Love is the great democratizer, the force that makes fools of gods and heroes of mortals, that breaks all rules and rewrites all laws. But Psyche knows none of this. She knows only that she has been dressed as a bride and led to a mountaintop, left there alone as evening falls, waiting for something terrible to claim her. The wind that carries her away is gentle as a mother's arms, soft as silk scarves, yet irresistible as destiny itself. She does not fall, she floats, carried through air that grows thick with magic, toward a palace that should not exist yet does, built from substances that have no names in mortal tongues. The palace reveals itself slowly, first as a glimmer of light in the distance, then as shapes that might be towers, might be dreams of towers, and finally as a structure that seems to have grown rather than been built, its walls pearl and moonstone and something that might be crystallized starlight. No servants are visible, yet invisible hands open doors before her. Invisible voices murmur, "Welcome." Invisible fingers light lamps that burn with flames that cast no shadows. Only a soft radiance that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. In the center of the palace is a chamber that makes her heart beat faster, though she cannot say why. The bed within is vast as a small lake, covered in silks that feel like water, like air, like nothing she has ever touched. And there she waits, as darkness falls, true darkness, the kind that exists nowhere in the mortal world, where stars and moon always provide some light. This is the darkness of possibility, of potential, of space between one moment and the next, where anything might happen. When he comes to her, he comes as darkness within darkness, presence without form, voice without body. His voice is honey poured over thunder, silk wrapped around steel, gentleness and power so perfectly balanced that she cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. He speaks to her of love, of devotion, of a marriage that will last as long as she never seeks to see his face, never lights a lamp in the darkness, never asks the question that mortal curiosity will inevitably demand she ask. "Trust me," he says, and his voice carries within it every love song ever sung, every poem ever written, every declaration ever whispered in darkness. "Trust me, and you will have everything your heart desires, save only the sight of my face." Trust me, and you will be loved as no mortal woman has ever been loved, with a love that will never fade, never diminish, never grow ordinary with familiarity. And Psyche does trust for a time. Night after night he comes to her, and their love is perfect as only love in darkness can be perfect, uncomplicated by the visual, by the judgments eyes make without consulting the heart. She knows him by touch, by sound, by the way the air changes when he enters the room, by the way her soul recognizes his, even though her eyes have never seen his form. Their conversations range through all subjects, from the deepest philosophy to the lightest laughter. And she finds in him not just a lover, but a friend, a companion, an equal, despite the vast gulf that separates mortal from divine. During the days, the palace provides everything she could wish. Food appears on golden plates. Music plays from invisible instruments. Books write themselves as she reads them, their stories adapting to her mood, her desires, her unspoken needs. The gardens change with her thoughts, blooming with whatever flowers she happens to remember. Paths appearing that lead wherever she wishes to go. It is paradise, perfect and perfectly isolated, for she sees no one but her invisible husband, speaks to no one but the voices that have no bodies. But isolation, even in paradise, weighs upon the human heart. Psyche begins to long for her sisters, for human faces, for conversations that do not vanish with the morning light. When she speaks of this to her husband, his voice carries for the first time a note of something that might be fear, might be sorrow, might be the foreknowledge of inevitable loss. They will poison your happiness, he tells her, his invisible hands holding hers with a grip that is both gentle and desperate. They will plant seeds of doubt that will grow into thorns that will pierce the very heart of our love. Please, my soul, my Psyche, do not ask this of me. But she does ask, and because he loves her, because love makes even gods vulnerable to the desires of their beloved, he relents. The west wind carries her sisters to the palace, and from the moment they arrive, everything begins to change. They see the wealth, the luxury, the impossible beauty of Psyche's new life, and envy enters the palace like a snake, subtle and sinuous, hiding in the shadows of their smiles. But who is he? They ask, voices sweet with false concern. This husband who will not show his face? Perhaps he is the monster the oracle foretold after all. Perhaps he is hideous beyond imagination. Perhaps he feeds on human souls. Perhaps he is fattening you for some terrible feast. How can you love what you have never seen? How can you trust what hides itself in darkness? The seeds of doubt, once planted, grow with unnatural speed. Fragment by fragment, they construct a monster in her mind, scales and fangs and eyes that burn with hellfire. They speak of other brides taken by creatures of the night, found later drained of life, empty husks that once held souls. They wonder aloud what kind of love requires such secrecy. What kind of husband forbids his wife from seeing his face? That night, when her husband comes to her, Psyche is ready. Hidden beneath the bed is an oil lamp, its wick trimmed, its reservoir full. Hidden beneath her pillow is a knife, sharp enough to cut through divine flesh if necessary. Though she prays it will not be necessary. She waits until his breathing deepens into sleep, that vulnerable state that even gods must enter when they take physical form, when they allow themselves to fully exist in the mortal realm. The lamp, when lit, casts a light that seems almost apologetic, as if it knows it is about to destroy something that can never be rebuilt. What it reveals is not a monster, but a god. And not just any god, but Eros himself, love in his most perfect form. His beauty is almost painful to look upon, like staring directly into the sun. Yet she cannot look away. His wings, folded beneath him, shimmer with feathers that seem to be made of condensed rainbows. His skin glows with its own inner light, and his face carries that perfect arrangement of features that makes mortals weep without knowing why, that makes them understand for a moment what divinity means. In her shock, her hand trembles. A drop of oil falls from the lamp onto his shoulder, hot enough to burn even divine skin. His eyes open, and in them she sees not anger, but something worse. Disappointment so profound it seems to hollow out the world. Sorrow so deep it makes the palace walls begin to fade like morning mist. "Oh, Psyche," he says, and her name on his lips sounds like a goodbye that will echo through eternity. You had everything. You had love, true love, the kind mortals pray for but rarely receive. All I asked was trust, and even that was too much. Now we must both suffer for this moment of doubt, this single instant when fear overcame faith. He rises, and his wings unfold, spanning the entire chamber, feathers rustling with a sound like wind through leaves, like waves against shore, like every goodbye ever spoken. The palace dissolves around them, its impossible architecture returning to the nothing from which it came. The gardens fade. The invisible servants fall silent. The golden plates and jeweled cups become dust and memory. And then he is gone, ascending into a sky that seems suddenly vast and empty, leaving Psyche alone on a barren hillside with nothing but a burned-out lamp and a useless knife. Her despair is absolute. the kind that makes breathing feel like betrayal, that makes each heartbeat an accusation. She has lost not just a husband, but the love of love itself, has wounded the very God who governs the force that makes life worth living. The world around her reflects her inner desolation. The grass is gray. The sky is colorless. Even the sun seems to give light without warmth, illumination without comfort. But Psyche is mortal, and mortals, unlike gods, are defined by their refusal to accept defeat. Where a goddess might rage for eternity, where a god might withdraw into sullen isolation, Psyche begins to walk. She does not know where she is going, only that stillness is death and movement might lead somewhere, might lead back to him, might lead to redemption, or at least to an ending that makes sense of the beginning. Her journey takes her first to temple after temple, seeking aid from the gods. But each deity turns away. Demeter, goddess of grain, says that love's wounds are not hers to heal. Hera refuses to intervene in what she sees as another of love's casualties, another mortal who reached too high and must now fall. Even Artemis, usually sympathetic to women in distress, says only that Psyche has made her choice and must live with its consequences. Finally, desperate beyond measure, Psyche goes to the one goddess she least wishes to see, Aphrodite, mother of Eros, goddess of beauty and love's pleasure, but not love's pain, not love's work, not love's transformation. Aphrodite receives her with a smile that could freeze blood in veins. Beauty weaponized into cruelty. Perfection become punishment. So, the goddess says, lounging on a couch made from crystallized seafoam, her voice carrying the music of waves breaking against cliffs, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. You are the mortal girl who wounded my son, who thought herself worthy of a god's love, who could not even obey the simplest command to leave well enough alone. You wish to win him back? Then you must prove yourself worthy, though I tell you now that no mortal has ever been worthy. No mortal will ever be worthy, and you least of all. The trials Aphrodite sets are impossible by design, meant not to test, but to destroy. First, Psyche must sort a vast storehouse of mixed grains, wheat and barley and millet and poppy seeds, all mingled together in a heap that rises to the ceiling. She must separate each grain by type before sunset, a task that would take 100 mortals 100 days. Psyche sits before the heap and weeps, knowing the task is impossible, yet beginning anyway, picking up one grain, then another, then another. But the ants remember her kindness from days when she was merely a beautiful princess who never stepped on their hills, who left crumbs for them from her own meals. They come in their thousands, their millions, tiny bodies organizing with perfect efficiency, each ant taking a single grain to its proper pile. By sunset, the task is complete, the grains sorted with a precision no human hands could achieve. Aphrodite's rage at this success is terrible to behold, but she cannot deny the task is done. The second trial is worse. Psyche must gather golden wool from the solar rams, creatures whose fleece burns with the heat of the sun itself, whose tempers are as fierce as their wool is beautiful. To approach them is to be burned. To touch them is to die. Psyche walks to the field where the rams graze, sees them shining like small suns, their hooves striking sparks from the stones, their breath steaming even in the heat of midday. She prepares to walk among them, to die trying, when the reeds by the river whisper advice. Wait until evening when the rams sleep. Then gather the wool caught on the thorn bushes where they have passed. The reeds remember her too. Remember a girl who would sit by the river and sing to them, treating them as friends rather than mere plants. Again, the task is completed. Again, Aphrodite rages. And again, a new trial is set. This time, Psyche must fetch water from the river Styx itself, the boundary between life and death, guarded by dragons that never sleep, surrounded by cliffs that no mortal can climb. The crystal vessel Aphrodite gives her is fragile as hope, clear as truth, empty as her heart feels without Eros. At the river's edge, faced with dragons whose eyes hold the memory of the first darkness before creation, Psyche nearly despairs. But an eagle descends, Zeus's own eagle, though she does not know this. The eagle remembers Eros, who once helped Zeus in his own loves, and for the sake of that old debt, the bird takes the vessel in its talons, soars above the dragons, and fills it with water that holds within it the essence of ending, of transition, of the boundary between what is and what is not. The final trial is the cruelest. Aphrodite demands a box of beauty from Persephone, queen of the underworld, beauty that can only be fetched by one who journeys to the realm of the dead and returns. This is not merely impossible, it is a contradiction and paradox, for mortals who enter Hades do not leave, and beauty cannot exist in the land of shadows. As Psyche stands at the entrance to the underworld, the gates of horn and ivory rising before her, like the manifested border between existence and its absence, we must pause our tale of divine love, challenged, and mortal determination tested. For another story calls to us across the valleys of myth, from mountain peaks, where different gods play out their own variations on this eternal theme of love that crosses the boundaries between mortal and immortal. The moon rises, as she always rises, But tonight, we see her not as the distant disk of reflected light that modern eyes perceive, but as the ancients saw her, as a chariot drawn by silver horses, whose hooves strike no sparks because they run on roads of condensed starlight, as a goddess whose pale beauty outshines the stars that attend her, as Selene, the Titaness who has ruled the night since before the Olympians claimed their thrones. Her light is not the harsh brilliance of her brother Helios's sun, nor the rosy fingers of her sister Eos's dawn, but something altogether different. A light that reveals by concealing, that shows the world transformed rather than exposed, that makes all things beautiful by making them mysterious. From her height, Selene sees everything that happens in the hours of darkness. She sees lovers meeting in secret groves, thieves slipping through shadows, animals hunting and hiding, dreams taking shape in sleeping minds. She has watched the world turn through countless nights, has seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach, has observed the patterns of mortal life with the detachment that comes from immortal perspective. Nothing surprises her anymore, or so she believes, until the night she first sees Endymion. He is sleeping on Mount Latmos, this shepherd who is also a king, or perhaps a king who chooses to be a shepherd. For the stories vary as all old stories do, changing with each telling like the moon herself changes through her phases. What does not vary is his beauty, a beauty so perfect that it seems almost an insult to the gods, as if mortality has somehow achieved something that divinity itself struggles to match. His hair spreads across the grass like spilled ink, dark against the moonlit earth. His face in repose carries that particular arrangement of features that speaks to something deeper than mere aesthetic pleasure, that suggests peace, completeness, the kind of contentment that comes from being exactly where one should be, doing exactly what one should do. Selene, who has looked upon countless mortals across countless years, finds herself slowing her chariot, commanding her silver horses to pause in their eternal journey across the night sky. She has seen beautiful mortals before, has watched them age and wither and die, has learned the divine art of aesthetic appreciation without attachment. But something about Endymion is different. Perhaps it is the way the moonlight seems to love him, pooling around him like water, like silk, like visible tenderness. Perhaps it is the way he sleeps, with such trust, such absence of fear, as if he knows himself protected, though he cannot say by what. Perhaps it is simply that moment that comes to every immortal, that sudden understanding that eternity means nothing without something temporal to give it meaning, that infinity requires the finite to define itself against. She descends from her chariot, leaving her horses to graze on clouds, and approaches on foot, her silver robes trailing behind her like liquid moonlight, her steps making no sound on the mountain grass. As she draws closer, she sees that he is even more beautiful than distance suggested. His breathing is deep and even, the rise and fall of his chest as regular as tides, as reliable as the phases of the moon herself. His lips are slightly parted, as if he's about to speak, to reveal some secret that sleep has brought him. Selene kneels beside him, this goddess kneeling beside a mortal, and in that genuflection is contained all the paradox of divine love for humanity. She who commands the tides, who pulls the oceans themselves in her wake, who has power beyond mortal comprehension, chooses to kneel beside a sleeping shepherd because his beauty has done what no force in heaven or earth could do. It has stopped her in her eternal journey, has made her forget, if only for a moment, the duties that define her existence. She touches his face, her fingers cold as moonlight, but gentle as moth wings. An Endymion stirs, but does not wake. Instead, he smiles in his sleep, turns toward her touch as flowers turn toward the sun, and murmurs something that might be a name, might be a prayer, might be nothing more than the sound of contentment given voice. In that moment, Selene feels something she has never felt in all her eons of existence. The desire to stop time, to hold this instant forever, to prevent the dawn that must inevitably come and steal this vision from her. But gods cannot stop time, not really. They exist outside it, beside it, through it. But they cannot halt its flow any more than a fish can stop the river it swims in. What they can do, what Selene does, is make a bargain with Zeus, a plea wrapped in all the dignity of her ancient lineage, all the power of her position as one who existed before the Olympians, one who remembers when the world was younger, when the boundaries between divine and mortal were less fixed, less absolute. Let him sleep, she asks, and in those three words is contained all of love's selfishness and all of love's generosity. Let him sleep eternally young, eternally beautiful, eternally at peace. Let me have this one thing, this one mortal who will not age, not die, not disappear into the darkness that swallows all mortal things. In return, I will continue my journey, night after night, will continue to light the world's darkness, will never shirk my duties or abandon my post. But let me have this, these moments each night, when I can pause beside him, can touch his sleeping face, can love him as only an immortal can love, perfectly, unchangingly, without hope of consummation, but also without fear of loss. Zeus, who understands obsession, who has felt the pull of mortal beauty himself, grants her wish. But as with all divine gifts, it comes with complications no one fully foresees. Endymion sleeps, will always sleep, remains forever young, forever beautiful, forever preserved at the moment of perfection that first caught Selene's eye. But he also remains forever unreachable, forever unaware, forever separated from the goddess who loves him by the thinnest and most absolute of veils, the veil between sleeping and waking, between conscious choice and unconscious existence. Night after night, for time beyond counting, Selene pauses in her journey across the sky. Her silver horses know the routine now. Slow without being commanded as they approach Mount Latmos. Stop without being told at the precise spot where the goddess can see her sleeping beloved. She descends, she kneels, she touches his face with fingers that know every line, every curve, every smallest detail of his features. She speaks to him, tells him of the things she has seen in her nightly journey, describes the changes in the world below, shares secrets that only the moon knows. Sometimes she thinks he hears her. His lips move as if responding. His hand twitches as if reaching for hers. His expression changes in ways that suggest dreams shaped by her words. But he never wakes, never opens his eyes to see her, never speaks her name with conscious voice. He remains suspended in that space between life and death, between mortal and immortal, between love fulfilled and love forever postponed. The other gods whisper about Selene's obsession, this nightly ritual that has become as fixed as the moon's own phases. Some pity her, understanding the exquisite torture of loving what cannot love back, of being bound to someone who exists in a different state of being altogether. Others envy Endymion, who has achieved what no mortal should: eternal youth, eternal beauty in eternal preservation from the ravages of time, even if the price is eternal unconsciousness. But what does Endymion dream there in his eternal sleep? The stories suggest he dreams of her, of a silver presence that comes to him in visions more real than reality, of a love that surrounds him like moonlight, cool and perfect and absolutely reliable. Perhaps in dreams they meet as equals, goddess and mortal. Perhaps in that realm where consciousness dissolves into something larger, they can be together in ways that waking life would never allow. Perhaps this is enough. Perhaps this is everything. Perhaps this is the only way a love between mortal and immortal can truly exist. In the spaces between states, in the twilight realms where boundaries blur and definitions lose their power. The moon remembers. Each month, as she wanes to nothing and waxes to fullness, Selene carries the memory of Endymion's face, uses it as an anchor, a reminder of why she continues her eternal journey. The moon endures. Through all the ages of the world, through the rise and fall of civilizations that worship her under different names, Selene continues her nightly pause, her ritual of love that has become as essential to her as the light she provides to the darkened world. The moon waits. For what, she cannot say. For Endymion to wake, though that would mean his death. For herself to tire of this love, though that seems less likely with each passing eon. For some resolution that exists beyond the imagination of either gods or mortals. In this waiting, in this endurance, in this remembering, Selene embodies something essential about divine love for mortals. It is not the passionate fire of Zeus's conquests, not the transformative trials of Psyche and Eros, but something quieter, sadder, more sustainable. It is love as vigil, love as constant presence, love as the acceptance of an impossible situation that nevertheless must be maintained because the alternative is unthinkable. There are those who say Selene bore Endymion 50 daughters, though how this was accomplished with a sleeping father remains one of mythology's mysteries. Perhaps gods have ways of creating life that do not require consciousness. Perhaps dreams can be fertile in ways that transcend physical limitation. Perhaps love itself, when pure enough, when patient enough, can generate new existence from nothing more than desire and devotion. These daughters, if they exist, would be creatures of the margin, beings who belong neither to day nor night, neither to sleep nor waking, carrying within them the strange heritage of a love that exists outside normal categories. As we watch Selene rise again tonight, as she has risen every night since Endymion first fell into his eternal sleep, we see in her face that mixture of joy and sorrow that defines all impossible loves. She will pause again at Mount Latmos, will descend again from her chariot, will kneel again beside the beautiful sleeper who holds her heart, though he cannot hold her hand. And in this repetition, this ritual, this reliability, she teaches us something about the nature of love itself. That sometimes it asks not for consumption, but for continuation. Not for resolution, but for patience. Not for possession, but for presence. The shepherds who tend their flocks on Mount Latmos say that on certain nights, when the moon is especially bright, they can see two shadows where there should be one beside Endymion's sleeping form. They say the grass grows greener where Selene's tears have fallen. that flowers bloom out of season where her footsteps pass, that the very air shimmers with a kind of visible longing. But shepherds say many things in the long hours of the night, and who can separate truth from wish, observation from imagination, when the moon herself is both real and symbol, both cosmic body and divine person, both distant light and intimate presence. The light changes now from silver to gold, from the cool illumination of the moon to the warm radiance of the sun. And with this change comes a different God with his own catalogue of loves that turned to sorrow, desire that became destruction, not through cruelty, but through the simple incompatibility of divine power and mortal fragility. Apollo, most beautiful of the Olympians, god of music and prophecy, healing and plague, the rational order that humans impose upon chaos, and the ecstatic inspiration that breaks all rational bounds. Apollo, whose very presence is like the sun at noon, too bright to look upon directly, too powerful to approach without consequence. He stands upon Parnassus, this golden god, his lyre singing even when he does not touch its strings, resonating with the harmony of the spheres, the mathematical precision that underlies all beauty, all truth, all meaning that mortals can perceive. His hair is light itself, not blonde, but the color of sunbeams, of honey held up to flame, of gold in its liquid state. His eyes hold depths that prophets fall into and never quite return from, seeing too much, understanding more than human minds were meant to contain. When he walks, flowers turn to follow his passage as they follow the sun. And when he speaks, his voice carries the authority of natural law, the certainty of mathematics, the irresistibility of music that bypasses the conscious mind and speaks directly to the soul. Yet for all his perfection, for all his power, Apollo's loves are marked by tragedy, with a consistency that suggests either cosmic irony or some fundamental law about the nature of desire between the divine and mortal realms. Perhaps it is because Apollo, as the god of reason and order, represents the attempt to impose structure on chaos. And love, true love, is essentially chaotic, essentially unreasonable, essentially resistant to the very order he embodies. Or perhaps it is simpler. Perhaps his light is simply too bright, his presence too overwhelming, his touch too charged with divine electricity for mortal flesh to withstand. Consider Daphne, the river nymph who preferred the freedom of the forest to the bonds of love, who ran barefoot through groves where sunlight barely penetrated, who had sworn herself to eternal virginity like Artemis, whom she served. She was beautiful in the way that wild things are beautiful, uncombed, unadorned, needing no enhancement, because she was already perfect in her naturalness. Her refusal to be anything other than exactly what she was. Apollo first saw her as she bathed in her father's river, the water running off her skin like liquid crystal, her hair spreading in the current like dark water weeds, like thoughts dissolved in dreams. He had been struck by Eros's arrow, though whether this was intention or accident, the stories do not agree. And the wound of that arrow was not pain, but something worse, immediate, absolute, uncontrollable desire that burned through his divine composure like fire through paper, leaving nothing but need, want, must have. He approached her as gods approach mortals when seized by desire, with the confidence of those who have never been refused. The assumption that to be chosen by a deity is the highest honor a mortal can receive. His words were honey and music, promise and plea combined. He spoke of the palaces he would build for her, each room containing a different season, so she could walk from spring to winter as she chose. He spoke of the songs he would compose in her honor, melodies that would make the very stones weep with their beauty. He spoke of the children they would have, beings of such perfect beauty and talent that they would remake the world simply by existing in it. But Daphne ran. Not the coy flight that invites pursuit, not the tactical retreat that increases desire through temporary denial, but real running, desperate running, the running of prey that knows itself pursued by a predator. It cannot hope to escape, yet must try anyway, because stillness means certain capture. Her feet, which knew every root and stone of her forest paths, flew over the ground with a speed born of terror. Behind her came Apollo, and his pursuit was terrible, not in its violence, but in its inevitability. He did not run so much as flow, moving with the same unstoppable certainty with which the sun crosses the sky. "Why do you flee?" he called after her, his voice carrying the bewilderment of divinity faced with rejection, the hurt of perfection found wanting. "I am not some shepherd, some mortal man with calloused hands and limited life. I am Apollo, son of Zeus, lord of music and light. I can give you everything, anything, all that your heart could desire. Only stop, only turn, only see me truly, and you will understand that this is not pursuit, but destiny, not capture, but completion." But Daphne knew, with that deep knowledge that exists below consciousness, that to stop would be to cease existing as herself. Apollo's love was not the gentle affection that allows the beloved to remain themselves. It was the consuming fire of divine passion that transforms everything it touches into something else, something that exists only in relation to the god, only as reflection of divine desire. When her strength began to fail, when she felt his breath on her neck like the heat of summer sun, when his fingers brushed her hair and she felt that touch burn through her like lightning through a tree, Daphne called upon her father, the river god Peneus, and made a request that was both salvation and destruction. Transform me, change me, make me anything but what I am, if what I am is what he desires. The transformation began at her feet, bark spreading up from where they touched the earth, her toes extending into roots that drank deep of groundwater, seeking stability in the darkness below ground that she could not find in the light above. Her arms, raised in supplication or surrender, became branches, her fingers twigs, her hair leaves that rustled with messages no human could read. Her skin roughened into bark, her blood became sap, her voice became the whisper of wind through leaves, saying nothing, saying everything, saying the name of freedom that can only be spoken by those who have given up everything else to achieve it. Apollo reached her just as the last of her human form disappeared into the laurel tree she had become. He embraced the trunk, felt the warmth of what had been Daphne still present in the wood, heard perhaps her heart still beating beneath the bark, slowing, finding the different rhythm of tree time, the patience of vegetation that counts years like humans count days. His tears fell on the roots, divine tears that ensured the laurel would be evergreen, never knowing the death of winter, forever preserved in a state of perpetual life that was also perpetual denial of the love that would have consumed her. "If you cannot be my bride," Apollo said, his voice breaking with grief that was also incomprehension. For how could anyone choose bark over divinity, roots over wings, silence over the music of the spheres? "Then you will be my tree. Your leaves will crown victors. Your branches will mark triumph. Your wood will be sacred, and no hand will be raised against you in violence. This I swear by the river Styx, and what is sworn by Styx cannot be unsworn, not even by gods." And so Daphne achieved her escape, though at a price that makes us question what victory means, what freedom costs, what love becomes when it is refused so absolutely. That transformation into another state of being entirely seems preferable to surrender. The laurel remembers her, carries her within its eternal green, her choice preserved in every leaf that will never fall, never brown, never know the release of autumn or the resurrection of spring, caught forever in the moment of her transformation. Neither human nor fully tree, neither free nor captured, neither dead nor entirely alive. Then there was Cassandra, princess of Troy, blessed and cursed by Apollo in a single breath. She was one of those mortals who seem to exist partially in another realm already. her eyes holding depths that suggested she saw things others did not, knew things others could not, understood patterns in the flight of birds and the fall of leaves that spoke of futures not yet born. When Apollo came to her, he came not as pursuer, but as teacher, recognizing in her a mind capable of containing the terrible gift of prophecy. He taught her to read the signs that exist everywhere for those who know how to look. The way smoke rises that tells of weather to come, the patterns in scattered bones that reveal the shape of fate, the messages written in dreams that most people forget upon waking, but prophets remember with painful clarity. Under his tutelage, Cassandra's natural gifts bloomed into true prophecy. The ability to see not just what might be, but what must be, what will be, what cannot be prevented, no matter how clearly it is foreseen. The price for this gift was to be Apollo's lover, a bargain made in the language of gods, where words mean more and less than mortal understanding allows. But when the time came for payment, when Apollo appeared ready to claim what he considered his right, Cassandra looked at him with those eyes that could see the future and saw too much. She saw herself diminished by his brightness. Her own gifts made mere reflections of his glory. She saw herself pregnant with children who would be half divine and therefore wholly problematic, caught between worlds, welcome in neither. She saw herself becoming like the other mortal women loved by gods, defined not by who they were, but by who had desired them. So she refused. Even with the gift of prophecy already in her, even knowing what her refusal would cost, she said no. The word fell between them like a sword, cutting the threads of possibility that had connected them, leaving only the raw edges of divine rage and mortal defiance. Apollo could not take back the gift of prophecy. What is given by gods cannot be ungiven, only modified, perverted, turned from blessing to curse. So he leaned close to Cassandra, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him like a personal sun, and he kissed her. But this kiss did not bring love or transformation or any of the things divine kisses usually bring. Instead, it brought a curse wrapped in the softest of touches. She would keep her prophecy, would see the future with even greater clarity than before, but no one would believe her, ever. She would speak truth and be heard as lies. She would warn of dangers and be laughed at as a madwoman. She would see Troy burn before it burned, would know every death before it happened, would watch everyone she loved walk toward preventable doom and be unable to make them turn aside. This was Apollo's revenge, more cruel than simple death, more painful than physical torture. To be right and never believed. To have wisdom and have it always rejected. to see clearly in a world determined to remain blind. When Cassandra stood on the walls of Troy and said that the wooden horse contained death, her words were true as words could be. When she warned that Paris would bring destruction in the shape of beauty, she spoke prophecy as pure as any oracle. When she named the hour of the city's fall, the manner of her father's death, the fate that awaited the women and children, every syllable was fact. And everyone who heard her thought her mad, thought her pathetic, thought her broken by some trauma that made her speak in symbols when she was being absolutely literal. This is perhaps the cruelest of all Apollo's loves, because it lasted longest. Cassandra lived with his gift curse for years, decades, watching the future unfold exactly as she had foreseen, unable to change any of it. Even when she herself was dragged from Athena's temple, even when she was given as a prize to Agamemnon, even when she saw her own death approaching in the shape of Clytemnestra's axe, she spoke the truth and was not believed. Apollo's kiss had ensured that truth itself became her prison, prophecy her punishment, clarity her curse. We must speak too of Coronis, though her story moves us from the realm of refusal to that of betrayal, or what gods perceive as betrayal when mortals dare to love other mortals while carrying divine children. She was beautiful in that particular way that draws God's attention. Not perfect, but interesting, with eyes that held intelligence and independence, a mouth that smiled at its own thoughts, hands that moved with purpose rather than merely grace. When Apollo loved her, she accepted his love, perhaps honored by divine attention, perhaps genuinely moved by the god's passion, perhaps simply unable to refuse what gods demand. She became pregnant with Apollo's child, carrying within her the weight of divinity, the strange burden of a child who would be more than human, less than God, caught in that liminal space that produces both heroes and monsters. But Apollo was often absent, called away by his duties, his other lovers, his nature that could not be contained in a single place or focused on a single person. And Coronis, left alone with a divine pregnancy and mortal needs, found comfort in the arms of Isis, a mortal man who could be present in ways a god could not. When Apollo learned of this, and gods always learn of these things, through birds that spy, winds that whisper, or simply through the divine knowledge that comes when their honor is touched, his rage was incandescent. Not the hot rage of Zeus that strikes and is spent, but the cold rage of a god who feels himself betrayed by someone he had elevated, however temporarily, above their natural station. He sent his sister Artemis to kill Coronis, or perhaps he killed her himself. The stories vary, as they do when touching on divine shame. But as Coronis lay on her funeral pyre, as the flames began to consume her mortal flesh. Apollo saw within her the child, his child, still living, still salvageable. In a moment of transformation from rage to grief, from destruction to preservation, he cut the baby from her womb, saving Asclepius, who would become the god of healing, as if Apollo needed to balance his act of destruction with an eternity of restoration. Yet, even this rescue was tainted with the violence of its occasion. Asclepius grew up to be the greatest healer the world had known, able to cure any disease, mend any wound. Even, it was whispered, raise the dead. But he carried within him the memory of his violent birth, his mother's death, his father's rage. When he eventually was struck down by Zeus's thunderbolt for the crime of bringing too many back from death, disrupting the natural order, it was as if the violence of his conception had finally come full circle. There was Cyparissus, the boy so beautiful that Apollo loved him with a love different from his usual passionate pursuits. This was tender love, protective love, the love of a god for a mortal whose innocence seemed worth preserving, whose joy seemed worth protecting. Apollo gave him a deer as a companion, a creature of such gentleness and beauty that it became Cyparissus' closest friend, following him through forests, eating from his hand, sleeping beside him under stars that seemed to shine more gently on this pair than on the rest of the world. But mortal happiness is fragile as glass, as temporary as morning dew. One day, hunting in the forest, Cyparissus threw his javelin at what he thought was wild game rustling in the bushes. The javelin flew true, guided by all the skill Apollo had taught him, and struck the deer through the heart. As the boy cradled his dying friend, as he felt the warmth leave the body that had trusted him absolutely, something broke inside him that could not be mended, not even by a god's love. Apollo offered him everything: forgetfulness, resurrection of the deer, transformation into something that would not feel such pain. But Cyparissus wanted none of these things. He wanted to grieve forever, to never forget, to carry his sorrow as a memorial to the friend he had killed through carelessness. So Apollo, in perhaps his gentlest transformation, turned the boy into the cypress tree, which became the symbol of mourning, planted in cemeteries, forever green, but forever associated with loss. Its branches reaching upward like arms raised in lamentation. We drift now from the marble halls and laurel groves of Greece, carried on winds that smell of different incense, different flowers, different possibilities. The air grows thick with the scent of jasmine and sandalwood, marigold and lotus, as we cross the boundaries between mythologies, between ways of understanding the divine, between cultures that see the relationship between gods and mortals not as transgression, but as play, not as tragedy, but as cosmic dance in which all beings, divine and mortal alike, play their ordained parts. Here in the lands watered by the Ganges, where the Himalayas touch the sky with peaks that pierce the very boundaries between earth and heaven, the gods wear different faces but dance the same eternal dance of desire and fulfillment, separation and union, the endless cycle of love that moves through all things like breath through lungs, like blood through veins, like rivers toward the sea. Here, divinity does not stand apart from humanity, but incarnates within it, takes on flesh not as disguise, but as genuine experience, subject to all the limitations and possibilities that mortal form provides. In the gardens of Vrindavan, where the Yamuna river winds like a dark serpent through groves of Kadamba trees, where peacocks call through the velvet darkness and the air itself seems to shimmer with divine presence, we find Krishna, the dark-skinned god whose flute calls all beings to dance, whose smile contains the universe, whose love encompasses, all yet focuses with perfect intensity on each individual soul that turns toward him. He is the 8th avatar of Vishnu, the preserver, but he is also a cowherd boy who steals butter, who plays pranks, who dances in the moonlight with the village girls who love him, with a devotion that transcends the boundaries between sacred and profane. On this night of the full moon in autumn, when the air has cooled from summer's fierce heat, but not yet taken on winter's chill, when the jasmine blooms with particular intensity, as if knowing its time is limited, Krishna stands on the banks of the Yamuna and raises his flute to his lips. The first note that emerges is not heard so much as felt, a vibration that passes through earth and water, air and fire, space itself, reaching into the hearts of all who have ears to hear, which is to say, all beings capable of love. The Gopis, the cowherd women of Vrindavan, hear this call in the midst of their evening duties. Some are cooking, some are tending children, some are serving their husbands, some are preparing for sleep. But when the flute's call reaches them, everything else becomes suddenly unimportant, suddenly unreal, like a dream from which they are finally waking. They rise from their tasks, not with thought, but with instinct, not with decision, but with inevitability, and begin to move toward the sound. Their husbands call after them, their children cry, their mothers-in-law rage, but the Gopis do not hear, cannot hear, will not hear anything but the flute that calls them to a love that makes all other loves seem pale reflections, distorted shadows on cave walls, when they have been offered the sun itself. They run through the village streets, their ankle bells chiming in rhythm with their footsteps, their dupattas streaming behind them like flags of surrender, their faces bright with a joy that is also terror, an ecstasy that is also annihilation. When they reach the forest, when they find Krishna standing in a clearing where moonlight pools like silver water, they see that he is alone, singular, one being in one body, and for a moment, despair touches them. How can one God love all of them equally? How can they each have the exclusive devotion they crave when there are so many of them and only one of him? This is the eternal problem of divine love. The God is infinite but appears finite, is all-encompassing but seems limited by form, belongs to everyone but each lover wants to possess them absolutely. Krishna sees their despair, understands it, loves them for it. For their despair is born of love so intense it cannot conceive of sharing, so absolute it demands everything or nothing. He smiles, and in that smile is contained the solution to paradox, the answer to impossible questions, the reconciliation of one and many. He begins to dance, and as he dances, he multiplies, becomes not many Krishnas, but Krishna in many forms, each form perfect, complete, fully present with each gopi who reaches for him. This is the Maharas, the great dance, where each gopi believes herself to be dancing with Krishna alone, where each experiences the totality of divine love without dilution, without competition, without the diminishment that comes from sharing. The forest clearing expands to accommodate this impossible dance, becomes a mandala of bodies moving in perfect harmony, each couple lost in their own world, yet all worlds synchronized in a pattern that speaks of cosmic order underlying apparent chaos. Radha is there, chief among the gopis, whose love for Krishna burns with such intensity that she has become, in the eyes of devotees, inseparable from him, his feminine aspect, his power of bliss, the devotion without which the divine itself would be incomplete. When she dances with Krishna, the other gopis fade not from existence, but from relevance. For Radha and Krishna together create a closed circuit of love that needs nothing outside itself, refers to nothing beyond itself, exists in an eternal present that neither remembers the past nor anticipates the future. Their love is not without pain, for Radha is married to another, and Krishna, even in his incarnate form, belongs to the world, not to any individual. Their meetings are stolen moments, their separations agony, their love a secret that everyone knows but no one speaks aloud in daylight. When Krishna eventually leaves Vrindavan, called to fulfill his destiny as prince and king, warrior and teacher, Radha remains behind, and their physical separation becomes the model for all spiritual longing, all souls seeking the divine beloved who seems absent but is actually closer than breath, nearer than thought. The stories tell us that Radha never saw Krishna again after he left for Mathura, that she spent her remaining years in Vrindavan, seeing him in every dark cloud, hearing his flute in every bird's song, feeling his presence in every breath of wind that stirred the leaves of the Kadamba trees where they had met. Yet the stories also tell us that their separation was illusion, that Krishna never truly left, that he remained in Vrindavan even while his physical form traveled elsewhere. For gods are not bound by the limitations of space and time that constrain mortal understanding. This paradox of presence and absence, union and separation, one and many, runs through all the stories of divine human love in Hindu mythology. When Shiva, the destroyer and transformer, falls in love with Sati, a mortal woman who is actually the goddess Parvati choosing mortal incarnation, their love shakes the three worlds. When Sati throws herself into the sacrificial fire, rather than endure her father's insults to her beloved Shiva, the god's grief manifests as the Tandava, the dance of destruction that threatens to unmake the universe itself. He carries her burned body across the cosmos, and wherever pieces of her fall, sacred sites emerge, places where the boundary between divine and mortal becomes permeable, where love and loss create portals between the worlds. Consider too the story of Savitri and Satyavan, where a mortal woman's love proves stronger than death itself. Savitri, a princess who chooses her own husband against all convention, selects Satyavan despite knowing through divine prophecy that he will die within a year of their marriage. Her love is not blind, but clear-eyed, choosing joy despite its brevity, choosing love despite its inevitable loss. When Yama, the god of death, comes to claim Satyavan's soul, Savitri follows them into the realm of the dead, not with violence or magic, but with devotion so pure, arguments so compelling, love so absolute, that even death himself is moved. She engages Yama in philosophical dialogue as they walk the paths that lead away from life. And with each of his responses, she draws from him a boon. First, she asks for her father-in-law's sight to be restored. Then, for his kingdom to be returned. Then, for her own father to have sons. And finally, with supreme cleverness, she asks for sons with Satyavan. Yama, caught in his own divine promise, must return Satyavan's soul to his body. For how else could Savitri have sons with him? Even death, it seems, can be overcome by love that is both clever and complete, both passionate and philosophical, both accepting of divine law and willing to challenge it through its own logic. In the Tamil lands of the south, we find the story of Kannagi, whose love for her husband Kovalan survives even his infidelity, his abandonment, his return in poverty and disgrace. When he is unjustly executed by the Pandya king, falsely accused of stealing the queen's anklet, Kannagi's grief transforms into divine fury. She tears off her own anklet, proves her husband's innocence, and in her rage becomes something more than mortal. Her curse burns the city of Madurai, and she ascends to heaven not through death, but through the sheer intensity of her devotion, becoming the goddess Patini, the faithful wife whose love transcends both betrayal and death. These stories from the Indian subcontinent show us a different understanding of divine mortal love than the Greek tales. Here, the boundaries are more fluid, the transformations more reciprocal. Mortals can become divine through the intensity of their devotion, and gods regularly take mortal form not as disguise, but as genuine limitation, experiencing human joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and loss. The cosmic dance includes all beings, and in the movements of that dance, in the moments when the music reaches crescendo, mortal and divine touch and transform each other. We see this in the story of Urvashi and Pururavas, where a celestial nymph, an apsara from Indra's court, falls in love with a mortal king. Their love is passionate, consuming, but conditional. She makes him promise never to appear naked before her except in their intimate moments. When this condition is inevitably broken through divine trickery, she must return to heaven, but not before bearing him children who carry within them the mixture of earthly and celestial, human ambition and divine grace. The pattern repeats with variations across the vast landscape of Hindu myth. Shakuntala, daughter of a sage and an apsara, loved by King Dushyanta, forgotten due to a curse, remembered through their son, who carries the truth of their union in his very existence. Damayanti, choosing Nala as her husband, even when gods themselves seek her hand, then losing him to gambling and madness, yet finding him again through love that recognizes the beloved even when transformed beyond recognition. Each story adds another thread to the tapestry, another movement to the dance, another verse to the endless song of divine mortal love. In these stories, we find not just romance but philosophy, not just passion but dharma, the cosmic order that must be maintained even as it is constantly challenged by love, that refuses to remain within prescribed boundaries. The gods love mortals because in mortality they find something they lack. The courage that comes from limitation, the beauty that comes from transience. the intensity that comes from knowing time is finite, and mortals love gods because in divinity they glimpse their own highest potential, their own deepest nature, the part of themselves that transcends the physical and touches something eternal. The forest of Vrindavan still stands, though changed by centuries. Pilgrims still come seeking the spots where Krishna danced with the Gopis, where Radha waited for her beloved, where divine love manifested in human form. They find there not historical artifacts, but living presence. For in the Hindu understanding, these stories are not past events, but eternal occurrences, happening always in the eternal now that exists beyond linear time. Krishna still plays his flute on autumn nights. The Gopis still respond to his call. Radha still waits and meets and parts and waits again. All of it happening in that space where myth becomes reality, where human longing meets divine response. The air shifts again, becomes lighter, yet somehow more substantial, filled with the sound of wind chimes and temple bells, the rustle of bamboo leaves, the distant sound of water falling over stone. We have crossed another ocean of consciousness, another boundary between worlds, and find ourselves in the island nation of Japan, where the line between human and kami, between mortal and divine, is drawn in water, constantly shifting, never quite fixed. Here the gods are not distant Olympians or cosmic dancers, but present in every tree and stone, every mountain and stream, close as breath, familiar as family, yet carrying within them depths of mystery that no human can fully fathom. In the mist-wrapped mountains of ancient Japan, where every peak has its residing deity and every valley its protecting spirit, the stories of love between kami and humans take on a different quality. These are not tales of conquest or trial, but of recognition, of finding in another being, whether mortal or divine, something that completes one's own nature, that answers questions one didn't know one was asking. The kami do not descend from heaven to earth. They are already here, have always been here, are the here-ness itself, the sacred presence that makes certain places thin, where the ordinary world becomes transparent to something larger. Consider the story of the Tennin, the celestial maidens who sometimes descend to bathe in mountain pools, leaving their feathered robes, their hagoromo, on the banks while they take human form to enjoy the simple pleasure of clear water on skin, of physical sensation that their ethereal bodies cannot normally experience. These beings are not quite goddesses, not quite human, but something between, messengers perhaps, or simply curious spirits drawn to experience mortality without committing to its full weight. One such Tennin came to Lake Yogo. drawn by its perfect stillness, its mirror surface that reflected sky and clouds so perfectly it seemed another heaven inverted. She laid her feathered robe on a pine branch, the fabric light as mist, shimmering with colors that had no names in human language, and slipped into the water. The lake received her like a lover, cool and embracing. And for a moment, she forgot she was celestial, forgot everything but the sensation of water on skin, the play of light on surface, the simple animal pleasure of swimming. A fisherman named Hakuryo watched from behind a tree, not with lustful intent, but with the wonder of one who recognizes the sacred when it appears. He had lived by this lake all his life, knew every mood of its waters, every season of its fish, but had never seen anything like this maiden, whose beauty was not striking, but subtle, not overwhelming, but pervading, like music heard from a great distance that changes the quality of silence. When she emerged from the water and reached for her robe, she found it gone. Hakuryo had taken it, hidden it, not from cruelty, but from a desire he could not name. A need to prevent this vision from dissolving back into the heaven from which it came. Without her Hagoromo, the Tennin could not return to the celestial realm, could not resume her true form, was trapped in human shape with all its limitations and possibilities. "Please," she said to Hakuryo when he revealed himself, and her voice carried the sound of wind through pine needles, of rain on still water, of all the subtle music nature makes when humans are quiet enough to listen. "Please return my robe. Without it, I am neither what I was nor what I am, neither celestial nor truly mortal, caught between worlds with no home in either." But Hakuryo, moved by desire that was more than desire, by recognition of something in her that answered something in him, asked her to stay, to be his wife, to share his simple life by the lake. And the Tennin, trapped by circumstance but perhaps also curious about this mortal existence she had only tasted in those brief swims, agreed. Or perhaps she had no choice. The stories are ambiguous about agency when mortality and divinity intersect, when the rules of one realm are imposed upon a being from another. They lived together for years that passed like days, like seasons, like the turning of a wheel that seems to move while remaining in the same place. The Tennin learned to cook rice, to mend nets, to perform all the small tasks that make up human life, and that she had never imagined in her celestial existence. She bore children, experienced the pain and wonder of bringing new life into the world, felt the weight of mortality in her borrowed bones. Yet always, there was something about her that remained other, remained distant, like a bird that sits on your hand, but never truly becomes yours. The children grew with something of their mother's strangeness in them, voices that could call fish from the deep, eyes that saw through mist and darkness, dreams that were more than dreams. They were loved in the village, but also feared, respected, but also avoided, carrying as they did the mark of mixed heritage that made them bridges between worlds, but citizens of neither. One day, years later, one of the children found the hagoromo hidden in the storehouse where Hakurio had placed it, wrapped in silk, preserved with herbs, treasured and imprisoned in equal measure. The child, innocent of the implications, brought it to their mother, saying, "Look at this beautiful robe I found. Whose is it?" The moment the Tennin touched her feathered robe, everything changed. Not gradually, but instantly, like water remembering its true nature after being frozen, like a sleeper waking from a dream that seemed to last forever but was only a moment. She remembered what she was, where she belonged, the celestial realm that had continued without her while she played at being human. The longing that seized her was absolute, irresistible. The call of her true nature that made everything else seem suddenly flat, colorless, unreal. She looked at Hakurio, at her children, at the life she had built, or that had been built around her, and in her eyes was love, but also distance, affection, but also the terrible clarity of one who sees the chains that have bound them, even if those chains were woven from care and kindness. She put on the hagoromo, and with its donning came the dissolution of her human form, the return of her celestial nature, the remembering of what it meant to be unlimited by flesh, unbound by gravity, unconfined by the small horizons of mortal existence. "I must go," she said, and her voice was already changing, becoming less human, more like wind, like music, like the sound between sounds. "I cannot not go. This is what I am, what I have always been, what I was pretending not to be. But know that what we had was real, even if it was also impossible, even if it was built on a foundation of theft and deception. The children carry both bloodlines and will bridge the worlds in ways neither of us can foresee." She rose into the sky, the hagoromo spreading like wings, like clouds, like thoughts released from the prison of skull and brain. Hakurio watched her disappear into the heavens, becoming first a bird, then a point of light, then nothing, or rather becoming everything, dissolved back into the celestial realm from which she had briefly descended. He lived the rest of his life by the lake, watching the skies, teaching his half-celestial children the ways of earth, while seeing in their eyes the reflection of heavens he could never reach. This pattern repeats throughout Japanese mythology with variations that illuminate different aspects of divine mortal love. There is the story of Urashima Taro, the fisherman who saves a turtle that is actually Otohime, the dragon princess of the undersea palace Ryugujo. She brings him to her realm beneath the waves, where time moves differently, where one day equals 100 years in the human world, where pleasure is constant and sorrow unknown. For what seems like 3 days, but is actually 3 centuries, Urashima Taro lives in this underwater paradise, loved by a princess whose beauty is like the play of sunlight through water, whose voice is like the sound the sea makes in shells held to the ear. Every pleasure is provided, every desire fulfilled before it is fully formed. Musicians play melodies that human ears were never meant to hear. Dancers perform movements that human eyes can barely follow. Feast follows feast in endless succession. And through it all, Otohime is beside him, her love both overwhelming and somehow distant, as if she loves not him specifically, but what he represents. The upper world, the realm of air and sunlight, change and mortality. But eventually, inevitably, Urashima Taro grows homesick. Paradise itself becomes a prison when one cannot leave. Pleasure becomes pain when it never varies. Even love becomes a burden when it offers no challenge, no growth, no story beyond its own perfection. He asks to return home just for a visit, just to see his aging parents, just to touch once more the ordinary world he had thought he was so eager to leave. Otohime grants his wish, but with warnings and a gift. A box that must never be opened. A tamatebako that contains something she will not name. Open this, she says, and everything we have shared will be undone, unwoven, made as if it never was. Keep it closed, and you carry a piece of this realm with you, a promise that you can return, a thread that connects the worlds. When Urashima Taro returns to his village, he finds not the home he left 3 days ago, but ruins, strangers, graves where houses stood. His parents are not just dead, but forgotten. Their graves worn smooth by centuries of weather. He is a legend now, a story grandparents tell children, the fisherman who disappeared into the sea and never returned. The realization breaks something in him. The understanding that paradise has cost him everything. That love with the dragon princess has severed him from human time, human connection, human meaning. In despair, forgetting or not caring about Otohime's warning, he opens the box. What emerges is not an object, but time itself. 300 years of postponed aging that strikes him in an instant. His hair whitens, his skin wrinkles, his bones bend, and he becomes dust, scattered by the wind that carries it perhaps back to the sea, perhaps to nothingness, perhaps to some other realm where time has no meaning and love needs no form. These Japanese tales of divine mortal love carry within them a particular understanding of mono no aware, the pathos of things, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things that makes them precious. The love between kami and human is always temporary, always doomed, not because the gods are cruel or jealous, but because the two realms operate on fundamentally different principles. Mortals exist in time, are defined by it, find meaning through it. Kami exist outside time or in different relationships with it. And when the two temporarily align, the result is beautiful but unsustainable. Like a flower that blooms for a single night, like snow that falls on cherry blossoms, like any moment of perfect beauty that cannot last, and is more beautiful because it cannot last. As it was in the beginning, when the world was young, and the boundaries between realms were suggestions rather than laws, so it continues in the mist-wrapped hills and deep forests of the Celtic lands, where the other world lies not above or below, but beside our own, separated by boundaries thin as spider silk, permeable as morning fog, crossable at certain times, in certain places, by certain people, whose fate or folly leads them across the threshold between what is and what might be. The Sid Mounds rise from the green hills of Ireland like dreams made earth. Hollow hills that are both tombs and palaces, both ancient burial sites and eternal feast halls, where the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, hold court in unchanging revelry. Time within the Sid moves to its own rhythm, sometimes faster than mortal time, sometimes slower, sometimes sideways, in ways that make sequence and causality mere suggestions rather than rules. A mortal might spend a night inside and emerge to find centuries have passed, or live there for what seems like years, only to discover that in the outer world, the sun has not yet set on the day they entered. In these twilight places, neither fully dark nor fully light, mortals and the fair folk meet and mingle, love and lose, bind themselves in relationships that partake of both worlds, but belong fully to neither. The stories that emerge from these encounters carry warnings and promises in equal measure, speaking of love that transcends the ordinary but extracts prices that may not be fully understood until they come due. Sometimes generations after the original bargain was struck. Consider Midhir the Proud, lord of the Cid of Bree Leith, whose love for Etain spans multiple incarnations, multiple forms, multiple crossings between the worlds. First, she was wife to him in the other world, beautiful beyond mortal comprehension. her hair like sunlight through honey, her voice like the sound harps make when the wind touches their strings without human hands. But through divine jealousy and transformation, she was changed into a butterfly, blown by winds through the mortal world for 1,000 years, experiencing existence as pure sensation without thought, as beauty without agency, as desire without the ability to act upon it. When finally she was reborn as a mortal woman, Etain retained no memory of her divine existence, no knowledge of Midhir, who searched for her through all the realms, who never stopped loving her despite her transformation, despite her forgetting, despite her new life as wife to Eoked Iram, High King of Ireland. She was content in her mortality, happy in her ignorance, fulfilled in her human life with its simple pleasures and comprehensible sorrows. But Midhir found her, as the other world always finds what belongs to it, drawn by threads of connection that neither transformation nor forgetfulness can fully sever. He came to Eoked's court disguised as a wandering warrior, challenging the king to games of fidchel, the chess-like game that in Celtic mythology often serves as metaphor for fate, for the movements of cosmic forces that seem random but follow deeper patterns. Game after game they played, and with each game the stakes grew higher. Gold, cattle, lands, all the wealth of the mortal world wagered and lost and won and lost again. Until finally, when Eohed had grown confident in his victories, Midhir proposed the ultimate stake, one kiss from Etain. Just one kiss, a small thing, a nothing thing. What harm could come from such a brief touch? The king agreed, understanding too late that some wagers cannot be measured in ordinary terms, that a kiss can be a key, a door, a remembering that undoes forgetting. When Midhir's lips touched Etain's, she remembered everything. Her divine nature, her 1,000 years as a butterfly, her original love that made all mortal affections seem like shadows cast by true fire. The recognition was instantaneous and absolute, like lightning illuminating a landscape that had been hidden in darkness, revealing that what seemed like the whole world was actually just one small valley, that beyond it lay vistas of such beauty and terror that mortal minds could barely comprehend them. Midhir and Etain rose together through the smoke hole of the great hall, transformed into swans, those birds that in Celtic mythology always signal transformation, always mark the crossing between worlds. They flew toward Bree Leith, toward the Sid, toward the other world where their love could exist without the constraints of mortality, without the forgetting that makes human life bearable. Behind them, Eoked raged and grieved, gathered armies, laid siege to fairy mounds. But mortal force cannot breach the boundaries of the other world when it chooses to remain closed. Yet even this reunion was not simple, not complete. Athene had lived as mortal, had borne mortal children, had loved with mortal heart. Part of her remained in the human world, even as part of her returned to the divine. She existed thereafter in both realms simultaneously, neither fully fairy nor fully human, embodying in herself the impossible reconciliation that love between the worlds demands. This theme of transformation and divided existence runs through all the Celtic stories of mortal fairy love. In the tale of Oisin and Niamh, we see it played out with particular poignancy. Oisin, son of Fionn mac Cumhail, greatest of the Fianna warriors, encounters Niamh of the golden hair on the shores of Loch Lean. She rides a white horse that needs no ground to run upon, whose hooves strike sparks from air itself, whose mane flows like liquid moonlight. "Come with me," she says, and her voice carries the music of the other world, the promise of eternal youth, eternal pleasure, eternal love. Come to Tir na Nog, the land of the young, where sorrow never touches, where age never comes, where every day is perfect as the first day of spring, where every night is gentle as summer twilight. Be my husband, my love, my eternal companion, in a land where eternity means something different than mere endless time. Oisin goes. Of course he goes. How could he not, when faced with such beauty, such promise, such escape from the mortal world where even the greatest warriors eventually fall, where even the strongest loves eventually fade? He mounts the white horse behind Niamh, wraps his arms around her waist that feels both substantial and ethereal, like holding moonlight that has somehow taken form, and together they ride across the waves, the horse's hooves barely touching the foam, traveling roads that exist between water and air, between the possible and impossible. Tir na Nog is everything Niamh promised and more. Palaces of crystal and gold rise from hills that are always green, where flowers bloom that have no names in mortal tongue because they embody concepts rather than mere biological existence. This one is the first laugh of a child. That one is the moment of recognition between old friends. Another is the pause before a kiss, when both parties know it is about to happen, but it has not happened yet. The food tastes of memory and desire combined. The wine brings joy without confusion. The music plays itself without musicians, responding to the moods of those who hear it. For 3 years, or what seems like 3 years, in a place where time has no real meaning, Oisin lives in perfect happiness with Niamh. They have children who are born already knowing how to sing, who speak in poetry, who carry in their faces the beauty of both worlds. Every day brings new wonders, every night new intimacies. It is paradise, but it is also, in its own way, static. Nothing really changes in Tir Na Nog because change requires time, and time. There is not a river, but a lake, not flowing, but simply present, all moments existing simultaneously. Eventually, homesickness touches even paradise. Oisin begins to dream of Ireland, of his father and the Fianna, of the hunts through real forests, where real danger made victory meaningful, of the campfires where stories were told that mattered because the tellers would one day die and the stories would be all that remained. He asks Neve to let him visit just once, just to see, just to reassure himself that the mortal world continues. She agrees, but with warnings that echo through all such tales. He must not dismount from the white horse, must not let his feet touch mortal earth, must not fully re-enter the world he left behind. For while 3 years have passed in Tir Na Nog, 300 years have passed in Ireland. The world he knew is gone, dust and legend, existing now only in stories that have been worn smooth by countless retellings. Oisin returns to find Ireland transformed. The Fianna are not just dead, but forgotten. Their great deeds reduced to folklore that no one quite believes. The forests where they hunted have been cleared for farms. The hills where they camped, topped with churches dedicated to a new god, whose message of mortality and redemption makes no sense to one who has tasted immortality. He is a giant among smaller men, literally, for the generations have shrunk, become less than their ancestors, as if the retreat of magic from the world has diminished humanity itself. Trying to help some men move a boulder, still thinking with the strength of the other world in his arms, Oisin leans too far from his saddle. The girth breaks. He falls. His feet touch the earth of Ireland, and in an instant, 300 years strike him like a wave. His body ages, withers, becomes dust before the eyes of those watching, leaving only stories, only warnings, only the eternal question of whether paradise is worth the price of severing all connection to the world of change and growth and meaningful choice. The pattern repeats with variations throughout Celtic mythology. Thomas the Rhymer, taken by the fairy queen to her realm beneath Eildon Hills, returns with the tongue that cannot lie, a gift that is also a curse in a world built on comfortable deceptions. Tham Lin, captured by the fairy court, held in their realm until his true love pulls him back through transformations of fire and ice, beast and storm, holding tight, despite the pain, because love demands we hold, even when holding hurts. In Wales, the story of Pwyll and Rhiannon shows us another aspect of this theme. Rhiannon, whose name means Great Queen, appears to Pwyll first as a woman on a white horse that cannot be caught no matter how fast the pursuer rides, because she exists partly in another realm where different rules apply. Only when Quill simply asks her to stop does she stop, teaching the lesson that force cannot capture what belongs to the other world. It must be invited, requested, met with courtesy rather than conquest. Their marriage brings together the worlds temporarily, produces a son who disappears on the night of his birth, stolen by forces that resent the mixing of fairy and mortal blood. The child is raised in another kingdom, not knowing his heritage, until circumstances bring about recognition and restoration. But the damage of that separation, that theft, that forced division between the worlds, echoes through generations, affecting not just the immediate family, but the entire kingdom, as if the land itself suffers when the balance between worlds is disturbed. Now, as our night deepens and the threads of our stories begin to weave themselves into a single tapestry, we can see the patterns that run through all these tales of divine love and mortal longing. These accounts of boundaries crossed and prices paid. These memories of times when heaven and earth were not so separate, when gods walked among us and we among them, when love was the bridge that connected realms that have since drifted apart like continents on an ocean of forgetting. Return with me now to where we began, to Zeus on his Olympian throne. But see him now not as the serial seducer, the divine philanderer, but as the embodiment of a force that runs through all things, the desire to cross boundaries, to experience the other, to know what it means to be limited when one is unlimited, mortal when one is immortal. His transformations into bull and swan and shower of gold were not mere disguises, but genuine attempts to experience existence from different perspectives, to understand creation from inside rather than from above. Each of his mortal loves, viewed from this distance, tells us something essential. Europa, carried away across the sea, speaks to the violence of divine desire, yes, but also to the transportation that love provides. The journey from one state of being to another that cannot be refused once begun. Leda and the Swan reminds us that divinity often comes to us in forms we do not expect, cannot fully comprehend, can only accept or reject without truly understanding what we accept or reject. Danae in her tower receiving the golden rain shows us that love finds ways through all barriers, that isolation cannot protect us from transformation, that even prisons can become temples when the divine enters them. And Psyche, dear Psyche, whose journey we followed through trials that seemed impossible yet were somehow completed. She shows us that mortal love for the divine requires work, requires proof, requires the willingness to descend into death itself and return. Her story does not end with her failure to trust Eros, nor even with her completion of Aphrodite's tasks. It ends with her transformation into a goddess herself, raised to Olympus not as mortal lover, but as divine equal, bearing voluptas, pleasure, the child of love and soul united. This transformation, this apotheosis, appears in various forms throughout our tales. Radha becomes inseparable from Krishna in the devotional imagination, no longer just a gopi, but the supreme lover, the embodiment of devotion itself. Etain exists simultaneously in both worlds, neither fully human nor fully fairy, but something new, something that partakes of both natures. Even Selene's Endymion, suspended in eternal sleep, achieves a kind of immortality, preserved forever at the moment of perfect beauty that drew divine attention. But we also see the other pattern, the one that speaks of inevitable separation, of loves that cannot be sustained across the boundary between realms. Apollo's lovers, transformed into plants and prophecies, sealed away from him by their own unwillingness or inability to withstand the full force of divine presence. The Tennin returning to heaven despite the children she leaves behind. The pull of her true nature, stronger than any earthly bond. Oisin crumbling to dust the moment he fully returns to the mortal world, as if the two states of being cannot exist in the same body simultaneously. These separations are not failures of love, but recognitions of fundamental incompatibilities, acknowledgements that divine and mortal operate according to different laws, exist in different relationships with time and change and meaning. The gods are eternal but static, powerful but limited by their own nature, capable of everything except true change, true growth, true surprise. Mortals are temporary but dynamic, weak but capable of transformation, knowing nothing for certain except that everything will end, and finding in that ending the urgency that makes life meaningful. When gods love mortals, they love what they cannot be, creatures of time, of consequence, of irreversible choice. When mortals love gods, they love what they cannot become, beings of permanence, of power, of existence beyond the cycle of birth and death that defines mortal experience. The love between them is always reaching across an unbridgeable gap, always attempt to unite what cannot be united, always beautiful in its impossibility. Yet the attempts continue, must continue, for in these attempted crossings something essential is revealed about the nature of love itself. Love is the force that seeks to unite disparate things, to bridge unbridgeable gaps, to make one from two, to find in the other what the self lacks. It does not matter that the union is impossible. The attempt itself creates something new, something that would not exist without the reaching, the yearning, the desire that accepts no limitation. In the Hindu understanding, this reaching is not tragedy, but lila, divine play, the cosmic dance in which all beings participate whether they know it or not. Krishna, multiplying himself to dance with all the gopis simultaneously, is not deception, but revelation of a truth that transcends ordinary mathematics. Love is infinite, can be wholly present in multiple places simultaneously, does not diminish when shared, but multiplies when given. In the Japanese understanding, this reaching is mono no aware, the pathos of things, the beauty that exists precisely because it cannot last. The Tennin's feathered robe hidden in a storehouse is every impossible love preserved in memory. Every perfect moment we try to hold on to, even knowing that holding on is what destroys it. In the Celtic understanding, this reaching is the thinning of the veil, the moments when the ordinary world becomes transparent to something larger, when mortals glimpse the other world that exists alongside our own, neither separate from it nor identical with it, but rather intertwined like Celtic knotwork, distinct threads that create pattern through their interweaving. And in the Greek understanding, which is perhaps the most tragic and therefore the most human, this reaching is both glory and doom, both the highest achievement of mortal existence and its ultimate limitation. To be loved by a god is to be marked for transformation, willing or unwilling. To love a god is to accept destruction, partial or complete. Yet mortals continue to reach toward Olympus, and gods continue to descend toward earth, because the alternative is worse than destruction. It is meaninglessness, existence without transcendence, life without the possibility of touching something greater than life. Now, as our long night's journey approaches its end, as the first hints of dawn touch the eastern sky, though darkness still holds court in the west, let us speak more softly, more slowly, letting our words dissolve gradually into the silence from which they emerged, letting our stories return to the great reservoir of myth from which all stories flow, and to which they all return. We have walked through gardens where roses bloom in impossible colors, where gods take form as bulls and swans and showers of gold. We have stood beside lakes where celestial maidens bathe, leaving their feathered robes vulnerable to mortal theft and mortal love. We have danced in forest clearings, where one god becomes many, where each lover experiences the totality of divine attention without dilution or division. We have entered hollow hills where time moves differently, where a night lasts a century and centuries pass in a night, Through all these wanderings, we have been seeking something, though perhaps we did not know what it was when we began. We have been seeking the place where divine and mortal meet, the moment when the boundary between heaven and earth becomes permeable, the love that bridges worlds, even when those worlds seem absolutely separate. And what have we found? We have found that the place where divine and mortal meet is not a place at all, but a condition, a state of being, a quality of attention. It exists wherever love makes us more than ourselves, wherever desire pulls us beyond our limitations, wherever we reach for something we cannot quite grasp, but cannot stop reaching for. It exists in every moment of genuine connection, every experience of beauty that stops us in our tracks, every encounter with something that reminds us we are more than flesh and bone, more than the sum of our days, more than the boundaries that seem to define us. The gods we have met tonight, Zeus and Apollo, Krishna and Shiva, the Kami and the Twatha Dedanan. They are not merely characters in old stories told by people who didn't know better. They are patterns in the human psyche, forces that move through our lives still, wearing different faces, but performing the same eternal functions. When we fall in love with someone impossible, we are Europa being carried across the sea. When we love someone we cannot see clearly, cannot fully know, we are Psyche in the darkness, trusting what we cannot verify. When we lose ourselves in dance, in music, in the moment when individual consciousness dissolves into something larger, we are the Gopis dancing with Krishna in the forest of Vrindavan. The mortals in these stories are us, have always been us, will always be us. We are Endymion sleeping while divinity watches over us, present but unreachable. We are Oisin trying to hold on to paradise while homesickness pulls us back toward a world we know is lesser but cannot stop loving. We are Thomas the Rhymer returning from the other world with gifts that are also burdens, truths that cannot be spoken in a world built on comfortable lies. We are all of them and none of them, each of us living out our own variation on these eternal themes. And what of love itself, this force that drives gods to madness and mortals to divinity? Tonight we have seen it in all its forms, passionate and patient, consuming and sustaining, creative and destructive. We have seen it bridge impossible gaps and create unbridgeable distances. We have seen it transform lovers into trees, into stars, into stories that outlast the civilizations that created them. We have seen it demand everything and offer everything, require absolute trust, and reward that trust with transformation, though not always the transformation we expected or desired. Love between divine and mortal, between eternal and temporal, between perfect and imperfect, is perhaps the ultimate metaphor for all love. For in every love, do we not reach across some seemingly impossible divide? Do we not try to unite with something fundamentally other, fundamentally unknowable, fundamentally beyond our complete comprehension? When we love another human being, we love a consciousness we cannot enter, a history we cannot fully know, a future we cannot predict. We love across the boundary of separate existence. And in that loving, we touch something divine, something that transcends the limitations of individual being. The trials that Psyche underwent, sorting the grains, gathering golden wool, fetching water from the Styx, retrieving beauty from the underworld. These are the trials that all love requires. We must learn discrimination, separating what matters from what doesn't. We must find ways to approach what seems too dangerous to approach directly. We must draw from the deepest sources, even those that speak of ending and transformation. We must be willing to journey into the underworld of the unconscious, retrieving from those depths the beauty that can only be found in darkness. The transformations we have witnessed, mortals becoming gods, gods becoming animals, lovers becoming stars or trees or stories. These speak to love's power to change us fundamentally, to make us other than what we were. When we truly love, we are no longer who we were before. We become larger, containing both ourselves and our beloved, yet also smaller, willing to diminish ourselves for the other's sake. We become paradox, contradiction, impossibility, made manifest. As the dawn light grows stronger, as the ordinary world reasserts itself, as the boundaries that seemed so permeable in the darkness of our storytelling begin to solidify again, remember this: the stories we have shared tonight are not ended. They continue in every moment when love crosses boundaries, when desire reaches beyond the possible, when we touch something eternal in the midst of our temporary existence. Somewhere, Zeus still transforms himself for love of mortal beauty. Somewhere, Psyche still sorts grains in the darkness, trusting that somehow the impossible task will be completed. Somewhere, Selene still pauses in her journey across the night sky, kneeling beside Endymion's sleeping form. Somewhere, Krishna still multiplies himself in the forest clearing, dancing with each gopi as if she were the only one. Somewhere, the Tennin still puts on her feathered robe and rises into the sky, leaving behind children who belong to both worlds and neither. These stories live because we live them. We are the gods descending into limitation for love of what mortality offers. We are the mortals ascending toward divinity through the intensity of our desire. We are the children of such unions, carrying within us both divine possibility and mortal limitation, both eternal longing and temporary satisfaction, both the reaching and the impossibility of fully grasping. The night is ending now, but nights always end only to begin again. The stories we have told will sink into the depths of sleep, will become dreams, will resurface in moments when we least expect them, when we see someone beautiful and feel that pull of impossible desire, when we love someone we cannot have, when we have someone we cannot keep, when we reach for heaven knowing we are earth, when we touch the eternal knowing we are temporary. Let these stories work their magic in the deep places of consciousness, where myth and dream and memory intertwine. Let them remind you that love has always been impossible and has always happened anyway. Let them teach you that the boundaries between divine and mortal, eternal and temporary, self and other, are not walls but veils, not absolute but permeable, not fixed but constantly being negotiated by the force of love that recognizes no limitation, accepts no final separation, acknowledges no defeat, even when defeat seems certain. And now, as the last words dissolve into the silence that was always waiting beneath them, as the stories return to the place where all stories live when they are not being told, as you return from the realm of myth to the realm of waking life, carry with you this understanding. You are both mortal and divine, both limited and limitless, both the lover and the beloved, in an eternal dance that began before the first words were spoken and will continue after the last silence falls. The gods still walk among us, wearing faces we recognize as human, but carrying within them depths we can only glimpse in moments of love, of beauty, of transcendence. We still walk among the gods, wearing our mortality like a garment that both conceals and reveals our divine nature, our capacity to love beyond reason, beyond possibility, beyond the boundaries that seem to define us, but actually only describe the starting point for our reaching. Sleep now, if sleep is what comes next. Wake now, if waking is where this journey has led you. Either way, know that you have been part of something ancient tonight, something that continues, something that includes you in its eternal story of love that bridges worlds, that transforms limitation into possibility, that makes mortals divine and gods mortal. If only for a moment, if only in the space between one heartbeat and the next, if only in the stories we tell ourselves in the darkness, when the ordinary world grows thin and the eternal becomes, for a brief, impossible, beautiful moment, absolutely present and absolutely real. The moon sets, the sun rises. The stories continue. The love remains. Always the love remains, bridging the gap between what is and what might be, between who we are and who we might become, between the mortal that ages and dies and the divine that lives forever in the moment, when love makes all boundaries transparent, all separations temporary, all endings new beginnings in the eternal dance of desire and fulfillment. Separation and union, the reaching and the impossible, beautiful, eternal reaching for something just beyond our grasp, but never beyond our hope. And so our story ends where all true stories end, not with conclusion, but with continuation, not with answers, but with deeper questions, not with separation, but with the promise of return. For tomorrow night, or 100 nights from now, or in another life altogether, we will tell these stories again, and they will be the same and different, eternal and new, ending and beginning, just as love itself is always the same and always different, always ending and always beginning, always impossible and always happening anyway. The silence that follows these words is not empty but full, pregnant with all the stories not yet told, all the loves not yet loved, all the boundaries not yet crossed. Rest in that silence. Trust in that fullness. Know that you are part of the great story, the eternal dance, the impossible love between heaven and earth that creates the world anew in every moment, in every meeting, in every reaching across the space between self and other. Mortal and divine, the possible and the beautiful, eternal, impossible, possible. Sweet dreams, dear listener, wherever in the world you lay your head tonight. May your sleep be deep and your dreams be visits to the realms we have explored together. May you wake renewed, carrying within you the memory of gods and mortals dancing together in the place where all boundaries dissolve, where all love is possible, where you are both the seeker and the sought, the lover and the beloved, the mortal reaching for heaven and the divine stooping to earth, meeting in that space between where all the best stories live, where all true love is born, where we all dance the eternal dance of separation and union that makes the world new in every moment. The stories sleep now. Let them dream in you. Let them wake when you wake. Let them live through your living. For you are the story now, the myth made flesh, the place where divine and mortal meet. Rest well, dream deep, wake gently. The stories will be waiting when you return. Always they are waiting. Always they continue. Always they remember you.